A world's ugliest puppy is dumped at a shelter, but when the vet takes one look, he shouts, "That's not a dog!" Suddenly, what seemed like a neglected stray turns into a shocking mystery. The staff thought they were saving a sick little animal, but instead they've uncovered something far more dangerous. Because hidden inside this trembling creature is a secret powerful people would do anything to keep buried. Now, with lives on the line, one woman faces an impossible choice: protect what she loves, or risk everything against a force that will stop at nothing. What exactly is this puppy? And why is someone willing to destroy anyone who gets in the way of the truth? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Greer Landon stifled another yawn. Working the night shift at Red Mesa Shelter wasn't glamorous, but someone had to be there for the animals that needed help in the darkest hours. The clock on the wall showed 3:15 in the morning, that dead time when even the crickets seemed too tired to chirp. She was just finishing up the nightly medication rounds when a metallic scraping sound echoed through the intake area. The noise made her jump, sending a few pills skittering across the floor. Someone was at the after-hours drop-off hatch. "Hello," Greer called out, but only silence answered. Typical. Most people who left animals this late preferred to stay anonymous. The intake hatch, a secure metal door built into the shelter's exterior wall, was designed for exactly this purpose. It allowed people to surrender animals safely when the shelter was closed. Greer had seen everything from kittens to injured raccoons come through that hatch over her years working nights. She approached cautiously, flashlight beam cutting through the dimness. A medium-sized pet carrier sat in the receiving area, rocking slightly as whatever was inside moved. A folded piece of paper was taped to the top, but the writing was too messy to read in the low light. "It's okay, little one," Greer murmured, though her heart always ached at these anonymous surrenders. She carefully lifted the carrier and carried it to the intake examination room. Under the bright exam lights, she could finally read the note. "Found him. Can't keep. Sorry. Not much to go on." Greer sighed and crouched down to peer through the carrier's metal grate. A pair of eyes gleamed back at her from the shadows inside. "Let's get a look at you, sweetie," she said softly, unlatching the carrier door. The animal inside cowered at the back of the crate. Even in the harsh fluorescent lighting, it took Greer a moment to make sense of what she was seeing. It appeared to be a puppy, but something about its face seemed off. The muzzle was oddly elongated, the ears too large and pointed. Its fur was matted and dirty, but seemed to be a mottled grayish-brown underneath the grime. "Come on out," Greer encouraged gently. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." After several tense minutes of coaxing, the creature finally crept forward enough for her to get a better look. Greer had to stop herself from gasping. She'd seen thousands of dogs come through these doors, but never one that looked quite like this. The puppy's face was almost grotesque, features twisted and exaggerated in a way that made it look more like a caricature than a real animal. Its eyes were set at an unusual angle, giving it an alien appearance. The legs seemed too long and spindly for its body. It was trembling violently, ribs visible through its patchy coat. "You poor thing," Greer whispered. She'd learned long ago not to judge animals by their appearance, but even she had to admit this was one of the stranger-looking puppies she'd ever encountered. Following protocol, she began the intake process, checking for a microchip. There wasn't one. Documenting identifying features and taking preliminary vital signs. The puppy allowed her examination but remained tense, occasionally making odd whimpering sounds unlike typical dog vocalizations. A noise in the hallway made Greer look up to see Trevor, one of the overnight kennel workers, peering through the window. "Holy cow, what is that thing?" he asked, nose wrinkled in distaste. "That's got to be the ugliest dog I've ever seen." "He's just scared and sick," Greer said defensively, though she couldn't entirely disagree with Trevor's assessment. "Can you grab me some wet food and fresh water?" "Sure, but don't spend too much time on that one." Trevor called over his shoulder as he walked away. With a face like that, it'll never get adopted anyway. Greer felt a surge of protectiveness toward the strange puppy. Yes, its appearance was unusual, but there was something compelling about those wary eyes watching her every move. The animal was clearly intelligent, and despite its fear, it hadn't shown any aggression. She spent the next hour getting the puppy settled into a clean kennel, complete with soft blankets, food, water, and a few quiet toys. It was obviously exhausted but too nervous to sleep, pressing itself into the corner furthest from the door. "Try to rest," Greer told it softly. "Dr. Crane will check you over first thing in the morning." Throughout the rest of her shift, she found herself making excuses to walk past the kennel, checking on her unusual charge. Each time, those strange eyes followed her movements with an unnervingly focused gaze. As dawn approached, more staff began arriving for the morning shift. Word about the ugly puppy spread quickly, and Greer noticed several people making detours past its kennel, pointing and whispering. It made her increasingly uncomfortable, the way they stared and commented as if the frightened animal was some kind of sideshow attraction. Dr. Hollis Crane arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, as he did every morning. He was a tall, lean man in his late 40s, with wire-rimmed glasses and hands covered in the small nicks and scars that came from years of handling animals. Despite his sometimes gruff demeanor, Greer had always appreciated his thoroughness and genuine concern for their shelter residents. "Heard we got an interesting one overnight," he said by way of greeting, flipping through the intake paperwork Greer had prepared. "Yes," she replied, leading him to the kennel. "Something's not quite right with this puppy, but I can't put my finger on what it is. He seems sick, maybe deformed." Dr. Crane adjusted his glasses as he peered through the kennel door. The puppy had barely moved from its corner, though it had eaten some of the food Greer left. Its strange eyes fixed on the vet with that same unsettling intelligence. Dr. Crane muttered, frowning. "Let's get him into exam room 2. It took both of them to carefully remove the nervous animal from its kennel. Though it didn't struggle, its whole body trembled violently as Greer carried it down the hallway. She found herself murmuring soothing nonsense, trying to calm it. In the exam room, Dr. Crane's frown deepened as he began his examination. He checked the puppy's eyes, ears, and teeth with methodical precision, making notes on his clipboard. When he pulled back the animal's lips to examine its gums, he suddenly went very still. "What is it?" Greer asked, noting his changed demeanor. Instead of answering immediately, Dr. Crane grabbed a magnifying glass from a nearby drawer. He spent several long moments examining the puppy's mouth, then checked its legs and the scruff of its neck. "Well?" Greer prompted when the silence stretched on uncomfortably long. Dr. Crane straightened up slowly, running a hand through his graying hair. "This isn't a dog," he said finally, voice tight with suppressed emotion. "It's a Mexican wolf pup." Greer stared at him, certain she must have misheard. "A what?" "A Mexican wolf. Canis lupus bailey, one of the most endangered wolf subspecies in North America." He pointed to marks in the pup's mouth. "See these tattoos on the gums? That's a registration system used for captive breeding programs. And these marks on the neck, those are from sedation darts. Someone's stolen this pup from a legitimate conservation facility." The implications slowly sank in. Greer looked down at the trembling creature on the exam table with new understanding. No wonder it had looked so strange. She'd been trying to fit its features into her expectation of what a dog should look like when it wasn't a dog at all. "But what's it doing here?" she asked, though she had a sinking feeling she knew the answer. "Nothing good," Dr. Crane replied grimly. "The illegal exotic animal trade is big business, especially for endangered species. My guess is someone was trying to smuggle this pup, realized how much heat they could face if caught, and dumped it here to cover their tracks." Greer felt sick. The poor animal had already been through so much. Stolen from its family, drugged, transported who knows how far, then abandoned in a strange place. No wonder it was so terrified. "What do we do now?" First, I need to document everything thoroughly," Dr. Crane said, already reaching for his camera. "Then we'll have to contact Fish and Wildlife Services." This is way beyond our normal scope. As if sensing they were discussing its fate, the wolf pup let out a soft whimper. Without thinking, Greer reached out to stroke its head gently. To her surprise, it leaned slightly into her touch, the first sign of trust it had shown. "Can we keep this quiet for now?" she asked. "At least until the proper authorities are notified. I don't want word getting out and whoever dumped him coming back." Dr. Crane nodded in agreement. "Good thinking. For now, we'll list him as a standard stray puppy in the system. The fewer people who know what he really is, the better." They spent the next hour carefully photographing and documenting every identifying mark on the pup. Dr. Crane drew blood samples and checked for any signs of injury or illness. Apart from being underweight and dehydrated, the pup appeared to be in relatively good health. "He's young," Dr. Crane commented as he worked. "Probably no more than 12 weeks old. Still dependent on his pack at this age. He must be terrified." Greer's heart ached at the thought. She'd always felt protective of the animals that came through their doors, but something about this pup's situation struck her particularly hard. Perhaps it was the way those intelligent eyes seemed to plead for help, or maybe just knowing how close they'd come to missing what he really was. "I'll stay late to help monitor him," she offered, even though her shift had technically ended hours ago. Dr. Crane gave her an approving look over his glasses. "Good. The fewer people involved right now, the better. I'm going to make some calls. I have a contact at Fish and Wildlife who should be able to help." As they settled the pup back into his kennel, Greer noticed his trembling had subsided slightly. He still pressed himself into the corner, but his eyes seemed to hold more curiosity than fear as he watched them. "You're safe now," she told him softly. "We're going to figure this out." What she didn't say, what she could see Dr. Crane thinking too, was that this discovery was likely just the beginning. Somewhere out there was a criminal operation trafficking in endangered species. Somewhere was a conservation facility missing one of their precious wolves. And somewhere, perhaps closer than they knew, were people who wouldn't be happy to learn their valuable contraband had been identified. The morning sun was streaming through the shelter's high windows now, but Greer felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She had a feeling their quiet little shelter was about to become the center of something much bigger than anyone had expected. Dr. Crane closed the kennel door carefully and turned to her. "Get some rest while you can," he advised. "Something tells me things are about to get very complicated around here." Looking at the wolf pup, no longer ugly in her eyes now that she understood what he was, Greer couldn't help but agree. But she also knew, with absolute certainty, that she wouldn't rest until they'd figured out how to protect this special animal that fate had placed in their care. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when chaos erupted at Red Mesa Shelter. Dr. Crane's revelation about the wolf pup sent immediate shockwaves through the building. The usually quiet halls filled with urgent whispers and hurried footsteps as staff members rushed to spread the news. Greer stood protectively near the kennel where the small creature lay curled up, still weak from whatever ordeal it had endured. In the growing daylight, she could better see the distinctive features Dr. Crane had noticed: the broader forehead, the slightly longer legs, the tattooed gums that marked it as part of a conservation program. The pup's ash-colored fur was matted and dull, but there was an undeniable wild beauty about it that tugged at her heart. "We need to call an emergency meeting. Now." Barbara Wheeler, the shelter's administrator, burst through the door with her cell phone clutched tightly in her hand. Her normally perfectly coiffed grey hair was disheveled, as if she'd been running her fingers through it repeatedly. This is a legal nightmare waiting to happen. The shelter's small conference room quickly filled with senior staff members, their faces drawn with concern. Greer took a seat at the far end of the table, her thoughts still with the pup she'd started thinking of as Ash. "Let me be absolutely clear," Barbara began, her voice sharp with anxiety. "This is now a federal matter. Having an endangered species dropped at our door puts the entire shelter at risk. We need to contact Fish and Wildlife immediately and keep our involvement to an absolute minimum." "But the pup needs immediate care," Greer protested, leaning forward in her chair. "It's obviously been separated from its pack too young, and it's showing signs of malnutrition." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "That's not our concern, Greer. We're not equipped or licensed to handle endangered wildlife. The best thing we can do is stay out of it and let the proper authorities handle this." "And what happens to the pup in the meantime?" Greer challenged, her voice rising slightly. "It needs regular feedings, medication, and socialization. We can't just treat it like a piece of evidence." "That's exactly what we need to do," Barbara countered firmly. "This isn't a stray dog, Greer. This is a federally protected species that someone has illegally captured and transported. The less we interfere, the better." Just then, a commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Bryony Tate, one of their most dedicated teenage volunteers, burst into the room, her freckled face flushed with excitement. "Is it true? There's a wolf pup? I just heard from Monica at the front desk." "Bryony, this is a private meeting," Barbara said sternly, but the girl ignored her, making a beeline for Greer. "I want to help," Bryony declared, her eyes bright with determination. "I've been reading about wolf rehabilitation programs for my biology project. I know they need special care and dash." "You need to leave now," Barbara interrupted. "This situation is way above your volunteer clearance level." But Greer saw something in Bryony's passionate response that resonated with her own feelings. The girl might be young, but her heart was in the right place. "Actually," Greer said slowly, "having an extra pair of dedicated hands might be exactly what we need right now." Barbara's face reddened. "Greer, I'm warning you! Stay out of this! That's an order!" Before Greer could respond, the front desk phone buzzed. "Wildlife Officer Pike is here." Monica's voice crackled through the speaker. The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. Rowan Pike's reputation preceded him. He was known for being thorough, professional, and uncompromising when it came to wildlife law enforcement. What most people didn't know, but Greer had heard through local gossip, was that he came from one of the oldest ranching families in the region. A family that had lost livestock to wolves and viewed them as nothing but vermin. Heavy boots echoed down the hallway, and Officer Pike appeared in the doorway. He filled the frame with his tall, broad-shouldered presence, his dark hair showing touches of grey at the temples, despite his relatively young age. His expression was carefully neutral, but Greer noticed the slight tension in his jaw as he surveyed the room. "I understand you have a Mexican wolf pup on the premises," he stated, his voice deep and controlled. "I'll need to see it immediately and begin documentation." Barbara practically jumped from her chair. "Of course, Officer Pike. We've been extremely careful not to disturb anything since we discovered what it was. We want to cooperate fully with your investigation." As they walked toward the kennel area, Greer fell into step beside Officer Pike. She couldn't help but notice how he seemed to carry himself with a weight beyond his official duties. There was something personal in the way his eyes darkened when they mentioned the wolf pup. "The pup's been through trauma," Greer said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. "Whatever happened to it, it needs gentle handling right now." Pike glanced at her, something flickering in his expression. "Miss Landon, I understand your concern, but this is more complicated than you know. Mexican wolves are at the center of some very heated conflicts in this region." "I know about your family's ranch," she replied, matching his low tone. "But this isn't about politics or ranching disputes. This is about a living creature that needs help." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. For a moment, the professional mask slipped, and she saw the conflict in his eyes. "My family lost 30 head of cattle to wolves last year alone. My father still refuses to speak to me because I chose this badge over running the ranch. So yes, Miss Landon, I understand very well what's at stake here." They reached the kennel where Ash was being kept. The pup had managed to eat a little of the special formula Dr. Crane had prepared, and was now sleeping fitfully in the corner of the enclosure. Despite its wild heritage, it looked impossibly vulnerable. Barbara stepped forward with a ring of keys. "We'll get it ready for transport immediately." "No," Greer said firmly, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "The pup isn't going anywhere until we have a proper care plan in place." "Greer!" Barbara hissed. "You are way out of line!" But Greer stood her ground, meeting Officer Pike's intense gaze. "This pup has been through enough. I understand there are protocols and investigations that need to happen, but they can happen while we ensure its survival. I'm not asking to keep it as a pet. I'm asking for the chance to do right by a living creature that was dropped in our laps." "She's right," Bryony piped up from behind them, her voice trembling slightly but determined. "The first 48 hours are crucial for traumatized animals. Moving it now could do more harm than good." Officer Pike studied them both for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he pulled out his notebook. "The pup stays here for now, under strict monitoring. I'll need detailed records of everything: feeding schedules, medical treatments, behavior observations. Nothing happens without my direct oversight." Barbara sputtered in protest, but Pike held up a hand to silence her. "This is my call to make. Ms. Landon, I'll need you to work directly with me on this. Every decision goes through proper channels." Greer nodded, relief flooding through her. She knew this was just the beginning of what would likely be a complicated and challenging situation, but at least Ash would have a chance. "I'll help too," Bryony declared, moving to stand beside Greer. "I can take notes and help with feedings." Pike's lip twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Supervised only, and with parental permission." Barbara cleared her throat loudly. "Greer, I need to speak with you privately. Now." In her office, Barbara didn't even wait for the door to close fully before rounding on Greer. "You are putting this entire shelter at risk. Do you understand that? One wrong move with that wolf pup, and we could lose our funding, our licenses, everything." "I understand the risks," Greer replied calmly, "but I also understand what's right." "That pup needs us, Barbara. We can't just wash our hands of it because it's complicated. This isn't about doing what's right." Barbara's voice rose. "This is about protecting this institution and everyone who depends on it. I'm giving you one last chance. Step back and let Officer Pike handle this his way, or you'll face serious consequences." Greer took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. In her mind, she saw Ash's trembling form, heard the weak whimpers that had first drawn her to the mysterious crate. She thought about all the animals she'd helped over the years, how each one had taught her something about standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. "I'm sorry, Barbara, but I can't do that. If helping that pup costs me my job, then so be it. But I won't turn my back on an animal in need. Not for politics, not for convenience, and not for institutional pressure." Barbara's face hardened. "Then consider yourself on probation. One mistake, Greer. One single mistake with that wolf pup, and you're done here." As Greer left the office, she found Bryony waiting anxiously in the hallway. The girl's face was pale but determined. "I heard everything," she whispered. "They can't fire you for doing the right thing." "They can," Greer said quietly. "But that doesn't mean we stop trying." She managed a small smile. "Come on, it's almost time for Ash's next feeding." As they walked back to the kennel area, they passed Officer Pike, who was on his phone speaking in low, intense tones. He caught Greer's eye and gave her a slight nod, not quite approval, but something close to understanding. Greer knew the real challenges were just beginning. Keeping Ash alive and healthy while navigating the complex web of regulations, politics, and personal conflicts would take everything she had. But looking down at the sleeping pup, watching the gentle rise and fall of its chest, she knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. This wasn't just about saving one wolf pup anymore. It was about standing up for what she believed in, even when the cost might be higher than she was prepared to pay. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same determination that had driven her to protect animals all her life. The morning sun now streamed fully through the shelter windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Another day was beginning at Red Mesa Shelter, but nothing would ever be quite the same again. Greer touched the kennel door gently, watching as Ash stirred slightly in its sleep. "We'll figure this out," she whispered, more to herself than to the pup. "Whatever it takes, we'll figure this out together." The double doors of Red Mesa Shelter burst open with an authority that made the front desk volunteer jump. Sterling Vaux's imposing figure filled the entrance, his expensive boots clicking against the worn linoleum floor. Behind him, 2 men in suits carried leather briefcases, their expressions as cold as their polished appearances. Greer, who had been checking on Ash's morning feeding, felt her heart skip when she heard the commotion. Through the kennel area's observation window, she watched as Vaux removed his tan Stetson hat, revealing perfectly styled silver hair that matched his tailored Western suit. "I'm here about my property," Vaux announced, his voice carrying through the shelter like a crack of thunder. "A registered wolf dog that was illegally taken into custody." Barbara Wheeler emerged from her office, clearly recognizing the influential rancher. Her usual confidence wavered as she approached him. "Mr. Vaux, this is unexpected. Perhaps we could discuss this in my office." "There's nothing to discuss." Vaux nodded to one of his lawyers, who produced a thick document folder. "I have here a court order demanding the immediate release of my animal. These papers prove ownership and proper licensing." Greer's fingers tightened around her clipboard as she moved closer to hear better. Rowan Pike, who had been reviewing intake documents nearby, straightened up and moved to stand beside her. "Something's not right," he muttered under his breath. "Vaux's Ranch is known for cattle, not exotic animals." Dr. Hollis Crane appeared from the medical wing, his usually rumpled appearance somehow more pronounced next to Vaux's polished exterior. He adjusted his smudged glasses, studying the scene with narrowed eyes. "The animal in question," Vaux continued, his voice dripping with practiced charm, "is a properly licensed wolf dog hybrid. My breeding program is fully documented and legal." He pulled out another paper with flourish. "I can show you the DNA certification." Barbara's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the documents. "We'll need to verify these, of course." "By all means." Vaux's smile didn't reach his eyes, though I should mention that every hour you delay could be considered a violation of the court order. My lawyers are quite particular about such things. One of the suited men cleared his throat meaningfully. "The financial penalties for non-compliance are quite severe." The shelter's board members, who had been hastily summoned, huddled together near Barbara's office, their whispered concerns carried across the room. "We can't afford a lawsuit, and the shelter's funding is already tight." Greer stepped forward, her voice steadier than she felt. "That pup came in severely neglected. As intake coordinator, I documented extensive signs of abuse." Vaux turned his attention to her, his expression darkening for just a moment before smoothing into practiced concern. "Unfortunate, if true. Sometimes animals escape. They get into trouble. That's why I'm here to bring him home where he belongs." "Her," Greer corrected automatically. "The pup is female." Something flickered across Vaux's face, surprise quickly masked by annoyance. Dr. Crane caught it too, judging by his sharp intake of breath. "Let me examine those papers," Dr. Crane said, moving forward. "As the attending veterinarian, I need to verify the medical records match our findings." While the documents were being passed around, Rowan quietly slipped away toward the kennel area. Greer followed, understanding his intent. They needed to check on Ash. The pup was where they'd left her, curled in the back of her kennel. But now she was trembling, her wild instincts perhaps sensing the tension in the air. Rowan crouched down, speaking softly to her, while Greer stood watch. "Dr. Crane." Hollis's voice carried from the front, sharp with discovery. "Could you join me in the exam room? I need your expertise on something." Greer caught Rowan's eye. "Stay with her," she whispered, then hurried to join the others in the exam room. She found Dr. Crane bent over his computer, pulling up the scans they'd taken of Ash's microchip earlier. His fingers flew across the keyboard while Barbara and one of Vaux's lawyers looked on. "Here," Dr. Crane said, pointing to the screen. "The microchip data shows signs of tampering. The original ID number has been partially shaved and reprogrammed. It's subtle, but the modification patterns are clear." "That's a serious accusation," Vaux's lawyer cut in smoothly. "Do you have proof these alterations weren't made by the shelter?" "The timestamps don't lie," Dr. Crane replied, "and neither does the tool marking pattern. This was done before the pup arrived here. I've seen similar cases in trafficking investigations." The word trafficking hung heavy in the air. Barbara's face had gone pale, but Vaux merely adjusted his silver belt buckle, seeming almost bored. "These technical glitches aren't relevant to the court order," he said. "I have proper documentation of ownership, unless you want to explain to a judge why you're violating a direct order." "Mr. Vaux," Greer interrupted, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "If you're the legitimate owner, you won't mind waiting while we contact the Mexican Wildlife Authority to verify the conservation program tattoo in the pup's mouth, the one that matches their endangered species database." The change in Vaux was instant and chilling. The practiced charm vanished, replaced by something cold and dangerous. He stepped toward Greer, using his height to loom over her. "Little lady," he said quietly, "you clearly don't understand how things work around here. I employ half this county. My donations keep this shelter's lights on. One phone call from me, and your funding disappears. Another call, and you'll never work with animals again in this state. Is that really a hill you want to die on?" "Yes," Greer replied, matching his quiet tone. "It is." The tension was broken by Rowan's return. He positioned himself carefully between Greer and Vaux, his law enforcement training evident in his stance. "Sir," Rowan said formally, "I've just contacted the Regional Wildlife Office. They're very interested in examining these ownership documents. They're sending a team now." Vaux's jaw tightened. He studied both Greer and Rowan for a long moment, then turned to his lawyers. "We're done here, for now." He settled his hat back on his head, then fixed Greer with a hard stare. "Remember what I said. Every hour you delay will cost you." He strode out as forcefully as he'd arrived, his lawyers scrambling to gather their papers and follow. The shelter's board members immediately surrounded Barbara, their voices raised in panic about budgets and legal fees. But Greer was already hurrying back to Ash's kennel, Rowan and Dr. Crane right behind her. The pup lifted her head as they approached, her wild eyes somehow knowing they were all she had. "The microchip tampering," Dr. Crane said quietly. "It's professional work. The kind that requires specialized equipment and expertise. This isn't just some rancher trying to keep an exotic pet." Rowan nodded grimly. "The trafficking rings we've been tracking use similar methods. They steal protected species, alter their identification, and sell them to private collectors." After Vaux's threatening departure, the unlikely group gathered in Dr. Crane's cramped office. Bryony perched on a stack of medical journals while Hollis hunched over his computer, analyzing the microchip data. Greer and Rowan stood behind him, watching strings of numbers scroll across the screen. "There," Hollis pointed, adjusting his smudged glasses. "The chip's GPS function wasn't completely disabled. It retained some location data from before it was altered." Bryony leaned forward eagerly. "Can you trace where Ash came from?" "Better," Hollis replied. "I can show where the chip was modified. The coordinates point to an old stockyard on the outskirts of town." Rowan frowned, recognition crossing his face. "The Martinez property. It's been abandoned for years. Perfect cover for illegal operations," Greer said quietly. She met Rowan's eyes. "We need to check it out." They waited until darkness fell. The stockyard loomed ahead of them, a collection of weathered buildings and rusted metal gates casting long shadows in the moonlight. Bryony clutched a flashlight, trying to hide her nervousness as they approached. "Stay close," Rowan warned, taking point as they entered the main building. Their flashlight beams revealed empty holding pens, but with telling signs of recent use: fresh straw, water bowls, distinctive marks on the gates where animals had paced. Hollis knelt to examine something on the ground. "Tranquilizer vials," he reported grimly, holding up a small glass bottle. "High-grade veterinary sedatives, the kind used for large predators." They moved deeper into the facility. In a back office, Greer discovered stacks of forged documentation and shipping manifests. Her hands trembled as she realized the scope of what they were seeing. "This isn't just about one wolf pup," she whispered. "They're moving endangered animals through here regularly. Jaguars, bears, rare birds." "Look at these dates," Bryony added, pointing to a logbook. "There was a shipment just last week." Before they could investigate further, bright lights suddenly flooded the building. Car engines roared outside. Rowan moved quickly to the window. "Multiple vehicles. Armed men. We need to go. Now!" They barely made it back to their cars before headlights swept the area. The drive back to the shelter was tense, everyone processing what they'd discovered. But their victory was short-lived. The next morning, Vaux's men arrived at the shelter in force. They carried an emergency court order and were accompanied by local deputies. Greer stood in front of Ash's kennel, heart pounding as she read the document. "This writ is illegal," she protested. "You can't seize an endangered species without federal approval." "The judge disagrees," one of Vaux's lawyers replied smoothly. "Step aside, Miss Landon." When she refused to move, two deputies gently but firmly pulled her away. She watched helplessly as they sedated Ash and transferred her to a waiting transport cage. The pup's frightened eyes met hers one last time before the cage was covered. Barbara called Greer into her office immediately afterward. The shelter director looked tired and defeated. "I'm sorry, Greer, but you're suspended indefinitely. The board is furious about your unauthorized investigation. Mr. Vaux is threatening a lawsuit." "Barbara, you know what's really happening here," Greer pleaded. "We found evidence." "Evidence you obtained illegally," Barbara cut in. "You've put the entire shelter at risk. I have no choice. Please turn in your keys." Greer walked out of the shelter, keys clutched in her shaking hand. Bryony was waiting outside, tears streaming down her face. Hollis and Rowan stood by their vehicles, their expressions grim but determined. "This isn't over," Rowan said quietly. "What we found at the stockyard? It's enough to launch a formal investigation." "But what about Ash?" Bryony asked, her voice breaking. "What will happen to her?" Greer stared at the shelter that had been her second home, feeling the weight of Vaux's power crushing down on them. But beneath the despair, something else was building. A fierce determination that refused to be intimidated. "We're going to find her," she said firmly. "Whatever it takes." The days following her suspension stretched endlessly for Greer. Her small apartment, usually a cozy refuge after long shelter shifts, now felt like a prison. She spent hours pacing, replaying every moment that led to Ash being taken, torturing herself with what-ifs and should-haves. The morning sun barely penetrated her drawn curtains, casting the room in gloomy shadows that matched her mood. Empty coffee cups littered her kitchen counter, testament to sleepless nights spent worrying about Ash's fate. Her phone lay silent, her shelter colleagues had been warned against contact, and even Bryony's usually constant stream of texts had dwindled to occasional worried emoji. Greer dropped onto her worn couch, absently stroking her elderly cat, Maurice, who'd been her constant companion through this dark time. "What are they doing to him, Maurice?" she whispered. The cat just blinked slowly, offering silent comfort. The sudden blast of her ringtone made her jump. Dr. Hollis Crane's name flashed on the screen, sending her heart racing. She fumbled to answer. "Greer." Hollis's voice crackled with urgency. "I need you to come to my clinic. Right now." "What's wrong? Did something happen to Ash?" "Not exactly. Just get here. Use the back door." 20 minutes later, Greer pulled into the small parking lot behind Hollis's veterinary practice. The morning was still early enough that few other businesses in the strip mall were open. She slipped through the rear entrance, finding Hollis in his cluttered office, surrounded by X-ray films. "Look at this," he said without preamble, holding up a film to the light. "I've been reviewing all of Ash's records, trying to find anything we missed." Then I noticed something strange in the shoulder X-ray. Greer squinted at the image. "What am I looking at?" Hollis pointed to a tiny shadow, barely visible against the bone. "See this?" At first I thought it was just an artifact on the film, but look here. He pulled up a digital image on his computer, zooming in. It's a second PIT tag, ceramic, nearly invisible to normal scanners. A second tag? Why would they? Because it's not a regular identification chip. Hollis's eyes gleamed with discovery. It's a ledger number. Smugglers use these to track their inventory without leaving obvious evidence. Each number corresponds to information about the animal's source, destination, and price. Greer sank into a chair, her mind racing. So this isn't just about Vo wanting to keep one illegal wolf pup. No, this is about an organized trafficking operation. Vo isn't just dabbling. He's running a pipeline, moving wild pups to wealthy buyers who want exotic pets. Hollis pulled out more files. Once I knew what to look for, I started checking other cases. 3 more animals in the last year, all with suspicious circumstances, all tied back to properties Vo owns. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock. Rowan entered, looking grim but determined. "Sorry I'm late." Traffic was bad. He noticed Greer's pale face. "What did I miss?" They quickly brought him up to speed. Rowan's expression grew darker with each detail. "This matches what I've been finding," he said, pulling out his own notes. "I've been talking to wildlife officers in neighboring counties. There's a pattern. Reports of missing wolf pups, suspicious transfers between private wildlife centers, always with some connection to Vox's business empire, but everyone's been too scared to investigate deeply." "Because of his influence?" Greer asked. Rowan nodded. "He's got judges in his pocket, politicians on his payroll, even some law enforcement." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. That's why he was so confident about taking Ash. He's used to operating with impunity. Greer stood up, energy flooding back into her limbs. "But now we have proof. That ceramic tag, it's physical evidence linking him directly to smuggling operations. If we can get to it," Hollis cautioned. "Ash is in his possession now, and you can bet they'll be looking for any tracking devices." "They won't know about this one," Rowan said. "These ceramic tags are cutting-edge technology. Most vets don't even know to look for them. Vo probably assumes the regular microchip is all we could find." Greer began pacing, her mind working furiously. "So we need to get Ash back before they discover it. But how? They'll be watching for us now." "We need help," Rowan said slowly. "Someone on the inside." He exchanged looks with Hollis. "I might know someone who could assist, but it's risky." "Who?" "Marla Vo, Sterling's stepdaughter." Rowan held up a hand as Greer started to protest. "Hear me out. She's the one who brought Ash to the shelter in the first place, remember? That wasn't an accident. She was trying to get the pup away from her stepfather's operation." Hollis frowned. "Can we trust her?" "I've been watching her for months," Rowan admitted. "She handles the books for Vao's kennels, but she's not happy about it. I think she's looking for a way out." Greer remembered Marla's haunted eyes when she'd encountered her at the shelter. She seemed scared of him. "With good reason," Rowan said grimly. "Vo keeps her isolated, controls her completely, but she has access to his properties, his records, if we can convince her to help us." "It's dangerous," Hollis warned. "If Vo catches her helping us—" "Everything about this is dangerous," Greer countered, "but we have to try. For Ash and for all the other animals in his pipeline." They spent the next hours planning, going over maps of Vo's properties, analyzing security patterns. Hollis contributed medical records that showed similar injuries in other animals, evidence of sedation, rough handling, forced confinement. Rowan shared reports from his wildlife officer contacts, building a picture of Vaux's trafficking network that stretched across 3 states. By afternoon, Greer's despair had transformed into determined focus. They had evidence. They had allies. Most importantly, they had hope. "I'll reach out to Marla," Rowan said as they prepared to leave, carefully through intermediaries. "We can't risk Vaux getting wind of this." "What should I do?" Greer asked, hating to feel sidelined by her suspension. "Keep gathering evidence," Hollis advised. "I'll send you copies of everything I've found." "Start building a case that's too big for Vaux to bury. And stay safe," Rowan added, touching her arm gently. "Vaux has eyes everywhere. Don't go anywhere alone and watch for surveillance." Greer nodded, though her heart raced at the thought of being watched. The stakes had grown far beyond what she'd imagined when she first found that trembling pup in the shelter's intake area. This wasn't just about saving one animal anymore. It was about exposing a criminal enterprise that treated living creatures like commodities. As she drove home, taking a circuitous route to check for tails, Greer's mind kept returning to Ash. The pup's frightened whimpers when Vaux's men had taken him still haunted her. But now she understood. Ash wasn't just a victim, he was evidence. His very body carried proof of Vaux's crimes, encoded in that hidden ceramic chip. Her apartment felt different when she returned. Not a prison now, but a war room. She cleared her kitchen table, starting to organize the copies of evidence Hollis had given her. Her laptop hummed as she began researching similar trafficking cases, looking for patterns that could support their investigation. Morris watched from his perch on the windowsill as Greer worked into the night, her earlier despair replaced by fierce determination. She would get Ash back, she would expose Vaux's operation, and she would make sure no more animals suffered in his pipeline of greed. The revelation of the ceramic PIT tag had changed everything. What had seemed like a personal vendetta by a powerful man was now revealed as something far more sinister and far more important to stop. Ash wasn't just one pup who needed saving. He was the key to bringing down an entire criminal enterprise. As night fell, Greer took a moment to stand at her window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Ash was waiting. Somewhere, Marla Vaux was perhaps gathering the courage to help them. And somewhere, Sterling Vaux was continuing his illegal operations, confident in his power and influence. But now they had proof. Now they had a plan. And most importantly, now they had hope. Greer sat at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee as morning light streamed through the window. Papers were spread across the wooden surface, printouts of wildlife protection laws, enforcement guidelines, and contact information for the state attorney general's office. Her eyes were tired from hours of research, but determination burned bright within her. "This has to work," she muttered, reaching for her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the number for the Wildlife Crimes Unit. After 3 rings, a crisp professional voice answered. "Attorney General's Office, Wildlife Crimes Division." Greer straightened in her chair. "My name is Greer Landon. I need to report organized trafficking of endangered Mexican wolf pups." There was a pause on the line. "Go on." For the next 20 minutes, Greer laid out everything. The mysterious arrival of Ash at Red Mesa Shelter, the altered microchip, the ceramic pit tag, and Sterling Vaux's involvement. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, fueled by the urgency of her mission. "We have evidence linking multiple cases across counties," she explained. "This isn't just about one wolf pup. It's an entire network moving endangered animals to private buyers." The official took detailed notes, asking pointed questions that gave Greer hope they were taking her seriously. When she finished, the woman said, "We'll need documentation of everything you've described. Can you compile that for us?" "Yes, absolutely. I have most of it ready now. Email it to the address I'm about to give you. We'll review and contact you within 48 hours. Greer's hand shook as she wrote down the email address. After hanging up, she immediately called Rowan. He answered on the first ring. "Any luck?" They're willing to look at our evidence. But Rowan, 48 hours might be too long. What if Vo moves Ash before then? There was a heavy silence on the line. Then Rowan spoke, his voice low and determined. I might have something, but it could cost me my badge. What do you mean? I've been monitoring communications at Vo's private airstrip. There's chatter about a shipment going out tomorrow night. Small aircraft, minimal crew. The timing fits with what we know about his operation. Greer's heart raced. You think Ash will be on that flight? It makes sense. After all the attention at the shelter, he'll want to move the evidence. Fast. Can we stop it? Maybe. But Greer, what I'm about to do... Rowan paused. Leaking confidential flight information is a serious violation. I could lose everything. Greer closed her eyes, feeling the weight of what he was risking. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm choosing. His voice softened. Some things matter more than a badge. They arranged to meet at Hollis's veterinary clinic in an hour. Greer called Hollis next, quickly explaining the situation. The vet agreed to host their planning session, adding that he had more information about the ceramic PIT tag that might help their case. As Greer gathered her documents, her phone buzzed with a text from Bryony. Heard your meeting at Dr. H's. Coming too. Don't try to stop me. Greer sighed, knowing the teenager's stubborn determination. She typed back, This could be dangerous. The response came instantly. Ash needs all of us. Besides, I'm good at being invisible when I need to be. At Hollis's clinic, they gathered in his private office, away from curious ears. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the blinds as they spread maps across his desk. Rowan had brought aerial photos of Vose's airstrip, marking security positions and possible approach routes. The flight's scheduled for 11:30 tomorrow night, he explained, his finger tracing the runway. Small cargo plane, minimal crew. They'll want to avoid attention. Hollis leaned forward, studying the layout. What about ground security? 2 patrol vehicles, regular rounds every 20 minutes, but there's a blind spot here. Rowan pointed to a section of fence partially hidden by scrub brush. If we time it right? We? Greer raised an eyebrow. You've already risked enough sharing this information. Rowan met her gaze steadily. I'm seeing this through. All the way. Bryony, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. I can help with the timing. I'm small, quick. I could be the lookout. Absolutely not, Greer and Rowan said simultaneously. The teenager's face flushed with determination. You need someone who can move without being noticed, someone who can signal when the guards are distracted. That's me. It's too dangerous, Greer insisted. More dangerous than letting Ash disappear forever? Bryony's voice cracked slightly. You've all seen how they treated him. What they might do to him. Please, let me help save him. The room fell silent. Greer looked at the girl who had become so much more than just a shelter volunteer. She saw the same fierce protectiveness she felt for Ash reflected in Bryony's eyes. Hollis cleared his throat. She has a point about needing a lookout, and she knows how to handle herself around animals if we manage to get to Ash. Rowan nodded slowly. We could position her safely away from any direct confrontation. Having an extra set of eyes could make the difference. Greer studied Bryony's determined face. If, and this is a big if, we let you help, you follow every instruction exactly. No heroics, no improvising. Deal? Deal. Bryony agreed immediately. I won't let you down. They spent the next hour developing their plan. Rowan would coordinate with local law enforcement contacts he trusted, ensuring they'd be conveniently occupied elsewhere during the critical time window. Hollis would have his mobile veterinary unit ready nearby in case Ash needed immediate care. Greer and Bryony would work together to monitor guard movements and create a diversion if necessary. Once we confirm Ash is there, Rowan explained, I'll contact my supervisor with an anonymous tip about suspicious activity. That gives us official cover to investigate, but we'll need to move fast before those people can hide the evidence. Greer spread out the documentation she'd prepared for the Attorney General's office, and all of this will back up what we find. The altered microchip, the ceramic PT tag, the GPS data from the stockyard. It builds a clear picture of organized trafficking. Speaking of the PIT tag, Hollis said, pulling out a file. I did more research on those numbers we found. They match a format used by legitimate Mexican wolf breeding programs, except these are from pups that were reported dead or missing. Those people are literally stealing and reselling wolves that are part of conservation efforts. The revelation hit them all hard. This wasn't just about saving one wolf pup anymore. They were uncovering a scheme that threatened entire recovery programs for an endangered species. Bryony, who had been making notes on her phone, looked up. So what's our timeline? Rowan checked his watch. We need to be in position by 10:30 tomorrow night. That gives us time to scout the approach and confirm guard patterns before the flight arrives. I'll bring night vision equipment from the clinic, Hollis offered, and emergency medical supplies, just in case. They spent another hour working out contingency plans and communication signals. As the meeting wound down, Greer felt a mix of anxiety and hope stirring in her chest. It was a dangerous plan, but it was their best chance to save Ash and expose Vo's operation. Get some rest tonight, Rowan advised as they prepared to leave. Tomorrow will be intense. Bryony hugged her backpack to her chest. I probably won't sleep anyway. Too excited. Not excited, Greer corrected gently. Focused. We all need to be completely clear-headed. They agreed to maintain radio silence until the following evening, not wanting to risk any suspicious communication that might alert Vo's people. As they left the clinic, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, the same colors that had filled the sky the night Ash first arrived at the shelter. Greer caught Rowan's arm before he got into his truck. Thank you for risking everything to help. He smiled slightly, his eyes serious. Some things are worth the risk. He hesitated, then added softly, Be careful tomorrow. All of you. That night, Greer sat at her kitchen window, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Ash was waiting. Probably scared, certainly confused about why the people who had started to care for him had let him be taken away. She pressed her hand against the cool glass. Hold on, little one, she whispered. We're coming for you. The plan was set. The team was committed. In less than 24 hours, they would attempt something that could either save Ash and expose a criminal network, or cost them their careers, maybe even their freedom. But as Greer finally lay down to rest, she felt a strange sense of peace. They were doing what was right, no matter the consequences. Tomorrow would change everything. Dark clouds loomed overhead as Greer crouched behind a stack of empty fuel drums at Sterling Vaux's private airstrip. The air felt heavy with the promise of rain, and distant thunder rolled across the desert landscape. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she adjusted the borrowed white lab coat that completed her veterinary technician disguise. Through the gathering gloom, she could make out the squat shape of the hangar where, according to Rowan's intelligence, Vaux planned to move his merchandise tonight. The thought of Ash and other wolf pups being treated like cargo made her stomach turn. In position. Bryony's whispered voice crackled through the tiny earpiece Greer wore. The teenager had insisted on helping, and now she was hidden near the automated security gate, ready to implement their plan. Copy that, Greer whispered back, grateful for the girl's unwavering loyalty. Remember, wait for my signal. Lightning flickered across the sky, illuminating the scene in brief, stark flashes. The wind was picking up, whipping at Greer's clothes and carrying the first fat droplets of rain. Perfect cover for what they were about to attempt. 2 black SUVs pulled up to the security gate, their headlights cutting through the growing darkness. Greer held her breath, watching as the vehicles passed through. Right on schedule. The state agents were in position too, waiting for her confirmation before moving in. "Showtime," Greer murmured, straightening her borrowed ID badge. She stepped out from behind the drums, forcing herself to walk with purpose towards the hangar. The rain was falling steadily now, plastering her hair to her face. As she approached, a burly security guard stepped forward, hand resting on his hip holster. "ID!" he barked. Greer held up the badge, letting rain splash across its surface. "Dr. Crane sent me," she said, using Hollis's name as planned. "I'm here to check on the special cargo before transport." The guard squinted at her badge, then at a list on his clipboard. Lightning crackled overhead, followed immediately by a boom of thunder that made them both jump. "Wasn't notified of any vet checks," he growled. Greer forced an exasperated sigh. "Look, I've got 3 other stops tonight. You want to be the one to tell Sterling Vaux his merchandise got sick during transport because you wouldn't let me do my job." The guard's expression wavered. Another flash of lightning illuminated the scene, and Greer silently thanked the weather for adding credibility to her urgency. After a long moment, he stepped aside. Inside the hangar, the space was dimly lit and filled with the smell of aviation fuel and wet concrete. Greer's shoes clicked against the floor as she made her way past a small private plane toward the back area. Her heart nearly stopped when she heard whimpering. There, stacked against the wall, were 3 travel crates. Through the metal grating, she could make out small, furry forms. One of them was unmistakably Ash. She would know those distinctive markings anywhere. The pup's eyes locked onto hers, recognition visible even in the low light. "Now, Bryony," Greer whispered into her concealed mic. "Do it now." Outside there was a sudden electrical whine, followed by shouts of confusion. Bryony had successfully jammed the gate's timer system, leaving it stuck open, the prearranged signal for the waiting agents to move in. Greer rushed to the crates, her hands shaking as she examined the locks. Simple pins, thank goodness. She could handle these. From her lab coat pocket she pulled out a multi-tool. The hangar doors burst open, bringing with them a gust of wind and rain. "Federal agents!" a voice boomed. "Nobody move!" Chaos erupted. Security guards shouted and ran. Radios crackled with panic. Through it all, Greer worked frantically at the crate locks, speaking softly to the frightened pups inside. "It's okay. It's okay," she murmured as the first lock gave way. She lifted out a trembling wolf pup, tucking it safely inside her coat. The second crate opened just as easily. When she reached Ash's crate, her fingers were slippery with rain and sweat, but the lock finally yielded. The moment she opened the door, Ash pressed against her hands, tail wagging despite the chaos. "I've got you," Greer whispered, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "I've got you all now." Bryony appeared at her side, soaked to the skin but grinning. "The agents have everyone contained," she reported, reaching out to help with the rescued pups. "We did it, Greer. We actually did it." Together, they carefully gathered the 3 wolf pups, using their bodies to shield the small creatures from the rain as they made their way toward the waiting wildlife transport vehicle. Federal agents had the scene secured, with Sterling Vaux's men in handcuffs. Lightning continued to flash overhead, but now it felt like nature's celebration of their victory. The wolf pups, though frightened, were safe and seemingly unharmed. Ash pressed his wet nose against Greer's neck, and she could have sworn she felt him sigh with relief. As they loaded the pups into the specialized transport crates provided by the Wildlife Service, Greer finally allowed herself to believe they had succeeded. Months of fighting, gathering evidence, and refusing to give up had led to this moment. Not just Ash, but 2 other wolf pups would now have a chance at the life they deserved. The rain began to ease, though thunder still rolled in the distance. Greer watched as Wildlife Service personnel checked over the pups, documenting their condition and preparing them for transport to a proper rehabilitation facility. Her clothes were soaked through, her hair was plastered to her face, but she couldn't stop smiling. Bryony stood beside her, equally drenched and beaming. "We're like heroes in those movies," she said, nudging Greer with her elbow. The ones where the good guys win and save the day. Greer wrapped an arm around the teenager's shoulders, pulling her close. "We did save the day," she agreed softly. "And you were incredible. I couldn't have done this without you." They watched as the transport vehicle was carefully loaded, each pup secured for the journey ahead. The federal agents were processing the scene, gathering evidence that would help bring down Sterling Vaux's entire trafficking operation. It was more than just a rescue, it was the beginning of justice. For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, letting the reality of their success sink in. The storm was moving away now, leaving behind the fresh, clean scent of rain-washed desert air. In the distance, a hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Ash and his fellow pups were safe. The evidence of Vaux's crimes was secured. Everything they had fought for had come to fruition in this rain-soaked night at the airstrip. It wasn't just a victory for them, but for every wild creature that deserved to live free from human exploitation. The federal agent in charge approached them, his badge gleaming in the hangar lights. "Ms. Landon, Ms. Tate," he said, nodding respectfully. "The wildlife transport team is ready to move out. Would you like to say goodbye to your friends before they go?" Together, they walked over to the transport vehicle. Through the specialized crates, they could see all three pups, already looking more relaxed. Ash pressed his paw against the grating when he saw Greer, and she gently touched her fingers to the spot. "Goodbye, little one," she whispered. "Have a wonderful life." Bryony wiped her eyes, not bothering to hide her tears. "They're going to be okay now, aren't they?" Greer nodded, her own eyes misty. "Yes, they are. They're going to have the chance to live as they were meant to, wild and free." The transport vehicle pulled away, carrying its precious cargo toward a new beginning. Greer and Bryony stood watching until its taillights disappeared into the lightening dawn. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that felt somehow cleaner, more hopeful. Around them, federal agents continued their work, documenting evidence and securing the scene. But for Greer and Bryony, the most important part was done. They had fought against seemingly insurmountable odds and emerged victorious. They had saved not just one wolf pup, but three, and helped expose a criminal operation that had caused untold harm. The rising sun began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, a beautiful dawn to mark their triumph. Despite their exhaustion, despite their dripping clothes and mud-covered shoes, they felt lighter than they had in months. They had done what needed to be done, fought for what they believed in, and won. The morning sun crept through Greer's office window at Red Mesa Shelter, casting long shadows across her desk, where she sat reviewing the previous night's rescue paperwork. Her coffee had long since gone cold, forgotten in the rush of documenting every detail of the raid that had brought Ash and the other wolf pups to safety. The victory still felt surreal. After weeks of fighting, they'd finally succeeded in exposing Sterling Vaux's trafficking operation. A sharp knock at her door made her look up. Martha Chen, the shelter's director, stood in the doorway with an ashen face. Behind her loomed two uniformed officers and a man in an expensive suit clutching a leather briefcase. "Ms. Landon," the suit-wearing man said, stepping forward. "I'm Wesley Drake from the county clerk's office. We have some urgent matters to discuss." Greer's stomach clenched as Drake pulled out a stack of documents. With mechanical precision, he laid out permit after permit on her desk, all bearing Sterling Vaux's name and official county seals. "These permits," Drake explained, his voice clinically detached, "establish Mr. Vaux's legal authority to breed and transport wolf-dog hybrids. They've been on file for months." "That's impossible," Greer protested, scanning the papers. "We checked." There were no permits. "These were unfortunately misfiled," Drake said smoothly. "The oversight has been corrected. Furthermore, given these valid permits, last night's raid constitutes criminal trespassing and theft of Mr. Vaux's legitimate property." Martha Chen wrung her hands. "Greer, they're taking the pups back." The words hit like a physical blow. "No," Greer whispered, rising from her chair. "These permits are forged. They have to be. The dates don't make sense. We can prove. The permits are certified authentic by my office. Drake cut in. The officers are here to execute the return of Mr. Var's animals. Greer watched helplessly as the officers moved toward the shelter's quarantine area, where Ash and the other pups were being held. Her feet felt rooted to the floor, her throat too tight to speak. The sound of whimpers and scraping claws echoed down the hallway as the pups were loaded into transport crates. "Wait!" she finally managed, rushing after them. "You can't do this!" "We have evidence. The altered microchips, the ceramic tags. Miss Landon." Drake's voice was sharp now. "I should inform you that Mr. Vox is filing a personal lawsuit against you for defamation and interference with his business operations. The damages claimed are substantial." Martha touched Greer's arm gently. "There's more," she said quietly. "Given the legal situation, the board has voted. We have to terminate your employment, effective immediately." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Greer steadied herself against the wall, watching through blurred vision as the officers carried the crates past her. She caught a glimpse of Ash's frightened eyes through the metal grate, and her heart shattered. "Your security badge, please," Martha said, her voice thick with regret. With trembling fingers, Greer unclipped her ID badge, the one she'd worn proudly for years, and placed it in Martha's outstretched hand. The plastic felt warm from being pressed against her heart all morning. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rowan. "Internal Affairs investigation launched. They're questioning my involvement in unauthorized operation. Could lose my badge." The words blurred as tears finally spilled over. Everything they'd fought for was crumbling. Not only had she failed to protect Ash, but she'd dragged Rowan down with her. His career, his reputation, all at risk because he'd trusted her judgment. "Please clear out your personal belongings by the end of the day," Martha said softly. "Security will escort you." Greer nodded numbly, unable to look at her former boss. She walked back to her office in a daze, barely registering the sympathetic glances from her co-workers. The shelter had been her home for so long, the place where she'd found her purpose, where she'd first held Ash and promised to keep him safe. Now the walls seemed to close in around her as she packed her things into a cardboard box. Photos of rescued animals, thank you cards from adopters, the ceramic mug Bryony had painted for her birthday. Each item a reminder of the life she was being forced to leave behind. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from the team. Hollis expressing outrage at the permits, Bryony asking what they could do next, Rowan updating her on the internal affairs investigation. She couldn't bring herself to respond. What could she say? She'd led them all into this fight, convinced them they could win against someone as powerful as Sterling Vaux, and now they were all paying the price. The security guard waited patiently by the door as she took one last look around her office. On her desk, the morning light still fell across the scattered papers, adoption forms she'd never complete, medical records she'd never file, lives she'd no longer be able to help. "I'm sorry about all this," the guard said kindly as he walked her to the exit. "Everyone knows you were just trying to do the right thing." But good intentions weren't enough, were they? Not against money and power and corrupted systems? Greer stepped out into the parking lot, squinting in the harsh sunlight. Her car sat alone in the staff section, soon to be just another visitor's spot. She placed the box in her trunk, then leaned against the car, letting the hot metal ground her in reality. The shelter's familiar buildings loomed behind her, no longer a sanctuary, but a monument to everything she'd lost. Her job, her purpose, her reputation in the community, gone in a matter of hours. And Ash. The thought of him being back in Vaux's possession made her physically ill. After everything the pup had been through, after all their promises to protect him, they'd failed. She could still see his eyes through the transport crate, filled with confusion and fear. Would he think she'd abandoned him? Her phone buzzed again, Rowan calling this time. She let it go to voicemail, unable to face his voice. He'd risked everything to help her, and now his career was in jeopardy. The investigation would dig into every decision he'd made, every regulation he'd bent trying to save those pups. How could she ever make that right? The morning sun climbed higher, beating down on her shoulders as she stood there, lost in the wreckage of her hopes. Other shelter staff arrived for their shifts, some averting their eyes, others offering sad waves. News would spread quickly in their small community. Greer Landon, the troublemaker who'd dared to challenge Sterling Vaux, finally getting what she deserved. She thought of Marla, Vaux's stepdaughter, who'd first brought Ash to the shelter. Had she known this would happen? Had she been trying to warn them about her stepfather's power when she'd slipped away that night? The sound of transport vehicles leaving the shelter made her flinch. She knew without looking that they carried Ash and his siblings, taking them back to Vaux's operation. All their evidence, all their careful planning, all their righteous determination. None of it had mattered in the end. Money and influence had won out, just as they always did. Greer finally got into her car, hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. The cardboard box of her belongings sat accusingly in the passenger seat. 5 years of dedication reduced to a few personal items and memories she couldn't shake. She started the engine but couldn't bring herself to drive away yet. The shelter had been more than just a workplace. It had been where she'd found her calling, where she'd met people who shared her passion for protecting the vulnerable. Now she was just another unemployed ex-shelter worker with a lawsuit hanging over her head. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from Drake, the county clerk, with formal notice of Vaux's lawsuit attached. The damages he was claiming would bankrupt her several times over. She deleted the email without reading further, knowing it would only detail more ways her life was being systematically destroyed. The morning that had started with such hope had become a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Everything she'd built, everything she'd believed in, had been stripped away in a matter of hours. And somewhere, she knew, Sterling Vaux was celebrating his victory, secure in the knowledge that he'd crushed another opponent who'd dared to stand against him. Greer finally put the car in drive, forcing herself to leave the shelter behind. She had no destination in mind, just away from the scene of her defeat, away from the empty cage where Ash had briefly found safety, away from the shattered remains of her career and reputation. The morning sun continued to shine, indifferent to her pain, as she drove through familiar streets that suddenly felt alien and hostile. She'd lost everything, and the worst part was knowing that somewhere out there, Ash and his siblings were being returned to the very danger she'd sworn to protect them from. Her phone buzzed one final time, a text from Bryony. "Don't give up. We're not done fighting." But Greer couldn't see any fight left to give. The system had won. The corrupt had triumphed, and she was left with nothing but a box of memories and the crushing weight of failure. The morning that should have been their victory had become their darkest hour, and Greer couldn't see any light ahead. She drove on, leaving behind the shelter, her career and her heart. Broken but still beating, somewhere in a transport cage headed back to Sterling Vaux's empire of cruelty. The sun had barely risen when Greer pulled her car into the quiet parking lot of the Red Rock Diner. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked her phone one last time, reading the cryptic message from Marla Vaux. 7 a.m., need to talk. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. Marla sat alone in a corner booth, her pale face half hidden behind a curtain of dark hair. She jumped when Greer slid into the seat across from her. "I didn't think you'd come," Marla whispered, her fingers nervously shredding a paper napkin. "After what happened at the shelter." "You brought Ash to us that night," Greer said quietly. "Why?" Marla's eyes darted to the door before she reached into her oversized purse. "Because I couldn't stand it anymore. The things he does to those animals, I keep the books. I know everything." She pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger and slid it across the table. Every PIT tag number, every buyer, every payment, 5 years of records. My stepfather, he makes me track it all. Greer's heart raced as she carefully opened the ledger. Page after page of meticulous records, dates, numbers, astronomical sums of money. "This is," she began, "everything you need." Marla finished. "I've been building this record since I realized what he was doing. I was too scared to do anything before, but when I saw how you fought for Ash..." Her voice cracked. "Someone needs to stop him." The bell above the diner door chimed, making them both jump, but it was only Rowan, right on time as Greer had asked. He slid into the booth next to her, his expression guarded as he studied Marla. "Show him," Greer said softly. Marla pushed the ledger toward Rowan. His eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. "This matches every case we've suspected him of," he said. "Every single one. With this evidence." "He'll know it was me," Marla said, her voice barely audible. "When this comes out..." Greer reached across the table and squeezed Marla's hand. "We'll protect you. I promise." Rowan was already on his phone, speaking quietly but urgently to someone at the Wildlife Crimes Unit. Marla watched him with frightened eyes, but there was relief there too, the look of someone who had carried a heavy burden for far too long. The early morning sun streamed through the diner windows as three unlikely allies sat together, the ledger between them holding the key to bringing down Sterling Vaux's empire. Years of fear and silence were about to end, transformed into the strength of unity and truth. Thunder crackled across the night sky as Sterling Vaux hurried to complete one final shipment before the approaching storm hit. Rain pelted the metal hangar roof while his men loaded crates into the waiting plane. Among them was Ash, who whimpered softly from his cage. Lightning illuminated the dark interior, revealing Greer's silhouette near the doorway. Vaux's face contorted with rage as he spotted her. In one fluid motion, he raised his hunting rifle and took aim. "Greer, down!" Rowan shouted, throwing himself in front of her just as Vaux pulled the trigger. The bullet ricocheted off a metal support beam with a sharp ping, striking a fuel line near the aircraft. Gasoline sprayed in an arc, igniting instantly from a nearby work light. Flames spread rapidly across the hangar floor. The storm intensified, and water began pouring through gaps in the roof. Greer's heart pounded as she heard Ash's frightened howls over the chaos. The wolf's cage sat in a rapidly flooding section of the hangar. "I have to get to him," she yelled to Rowan. "Greer, wait!" But she was already splashing through the rising water. The cage's lock was submerged. Greer took a deep breath and ducked under, feeling blindly for the mechanism. Her lungs burned as precious seconds ticked by. Finally, her fingers found the latch and yanked it free. Above water again, she hauled the cage door open. Ash leaped into her arms as federal agents swarmed the hangar, weapons drawn. "Sterling Vaux, you're under arrest," an agent announced, while others moved to subdue his men. Vaux's empire crumbled that night in the storm. Evidence from Marla's ledger, combined with the attempted illegal shipment, guaranteed he would face justice at last. Months later, standing on a mountain ridge, Greer watched as Ash's siblings bounded into the wilderness. They had been successfully rehabilitated and were ready to rejoin their natural habitat. Beside her, Rowan squeezed her hand. Ash himself had found a different calling. As an ambassador wolf at Greer's new sanctuary program, he helped educate people about wolf conservation and wildlife trafficking. His gentle nature won over even the most skeptical visitors. "They're really gone," Greer said softly as the last wolf disappeared into the forest. "But not forgotten," Rowan replied, pulling her close. Together they stood watching the trees where the wolves had vanished, marking both an ending and a beginning. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.